yourself and what you've got going on, and then let's get into the wealth formula to optimize returns. But can you unmute your
Oh, got it. Here you go. Can you hear me?
Buck, we can hear you, and I'm just going to go ahead and recap so everyone else is with us as well. Last panel of the day, 5, will go until 6:15 Eastern, so we've got about an hour and 15 minutes, and then I'll jump back on and wrap up. Let's go ahead and get started, though. Tell us a little bit about yourself and get us into this wealth formula to optimize our returns.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I do a screen share, or do you? Are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead and share your screen if you got your content.
So let's put that up here, and you see it?
We have got it.
Okay, got it. All right. Well, thanks for having me, Danny, and thanks for everyone who organized this event. I want to talk today about what I call Wealth 2.0. So I am Buck Joffrey from Wealth Formula Podcast. I'll get into all of the questions you asked as we move along here. As an introduction to this talk, I'm going to start out with a little bit about me, a little bit about wealth paradigms that I would say kind of go from the more simple to the more complex. And of course, I call my own wealth formula Wealth 2.0 because I think it's a little bit different than what a lot of people think about, and hopefully it'll be helpful to some of you in that regard. After that, I'm going to specifically talk about what I consider the mathematical wealth formula, and then finally show real examples of how I can use the wealth formula to create more wealth in a shorter period of time, which is, I think, what we all would like to do. So starting out with who I am. So believe it or not, I'm a board certified surgeon. So this may be the only time in your life where you might actually take financial guidance from a physician. But I am a board certified surgeon. But I'm also an entrepreneur who started multiple companies. I don't practice anymore. I only practiced for about 6 or 7 years after residency training. I'm also an asset manager. That's about $300 million of real estate under management now. And a number of you possibly know me. I shouldn't say probably, but you possibly know me as a podcaster and financial educator on Wealth Formula Podcast or wealthformula.com. Wealth Formula Podcast is obviously available in the usual places, iTunes, Stitcher. I'm on YouTube as well. So let's start at the beginning. So again, who am I? I'm a surgeon. Believe it or not, I started out as a neurosurgeon. Ultimately got training in head and neck surgery as well, and ultimately plastic surgery. Finished my residency training back in around 2008, 2009. And I was really burned out on medicine. But at that point, I didn't know what else to do. I mean, I never really thought about money in those days, which is not uncommon for doctors. We don't generally, a lot of us go into this area just figuring that we'll be fine. We don't really think about money, making money. We just assume we'll be okay and we're going to get to do what we've always wanted to do. But anyway, I was burned out. The day after residency, I got married the day after residency graduation and went on a honeymoon to Mexico. A week later on the way back, I was picked up a book and read it on the plane in Puerto Vallarta, and it changed my life. And this is probably a story that you've heard a million times, but it was mine too. That book was written by this guy, Robert Kiyosaki, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. I got lucky to get to know him a little bit on the Real Estate Guys cruise a couple of years ago, and this is at his 70th birthday party. Now, Robert, reading his book, Cash Flow Quadrant in particular, so what changed? For me, it wasn't just about real estate. I mean, for me, reading the book was a realization that I didn't have to work for anyone. The idea of being an entrepreneur at this point had never occurred to me before. And the idea that I could and probably should invest my own money also never occurred to me before. I mean, in fact, it never occurred to me that I was in complete control of my own destiny, and that school, this thing that I was very good at and was doing for a very long time, was preventing me from actually thinking for myself. Now, that's counterintuitive, but as an entrepreneur, you realize that, you start thinking a very different way, and you were never taught that way. So what was the actions I took? Again, my first step was not to go out and immediately buy a rental house. I started a business because I wanted to get out of that left side of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant. For those of you who read it, you know what I'm talking about. So then when I did that, I was really pretty successful. I think I'm more of an entrepreneur than anything else. And so when I was successful, I started making money. I made a bunch of money, and I invested in real estate just like Robert Kiyosaki told me to. But the funny thing is, it actually didn't seem to be very efficient. So what do I mean by that? So when we talk about Wealth 1.0, that's kind of what a lot of people think about when they read Robert's work initially. The idea of buying cash flow real estate until the streams of income are higher, they're high enough to support your lifestyle. Then you quit your job one day. It's like replacing your income. That's what everybody talks about. At this point, as an entrepreneur, I was making over $1 million per year, and I was paying about $400,000 to $500,000 in taxes. So I started doing the calculations in my head. So how long would it take me to get to $1 million per year in passive cash flow at an average of 10% cash on cash, which, is a pretty average, but pretty good number if you're getting it consistently in real estate? Well, I would have to invest in $10 million in real estate, and that was going to take a very long time, especially with the amount of taxes I was paying. So what I realized was that the Kiyosaki formula is not actually that easy to implement when you are used to making a lot of money. And the reality is that he wrote this book and these books, the initial books, for the masses, right? He was writing what I would call a Wealth 1.0 book. I know for a fact, knowing what Robert invests in and stuff, he's really a Wealth 2.0 investor, as you will see in a minute what I'm talking about there. So what is Wealth 2.0? So it addresses the question of how do you create wealth faster? How do you create wealth with less money? And this understanding of this is the key to creating wealth and the secret of the wealthiest people in the world. Now, I've studied them closely. I've looked at all of the techniques that a lot of really wealthy people use, and I've come up with an equation that I believe describes the wealth formula of the true wealthy. And that is, wealth is equal to the product, meaning, multiplying. So mass times velocity times leverage. So I'm going to go through each one of those and talk about how this is of value. So mass. So mass in what I'm talking about here is simply the amount of money you invest. You don't invest any money, it doesn't matter what kind of yield you get. It doesn't matter what kind of leverage you use. You're just not going to make that much money. So you have to invest money in order to create wealth. Velocity. Velocity is something that people talk about sometimes. The way I define it, though, is how quickly you get your invested capital returned to your pocket, right? So if you invest something for, say, $50,000 in something, how long before you get that $50,000 back? And so that question is not just about yield. It's not about 9 or 10%, cash on cash returns. It is about how quickly you get your money back. And then the final component is leverage. So leverage is using mortgages, other people's money, other kinds of amplification strategies. And so these are the key variables to creating wealth. So let's start with mass. In order to create wealth, you must invest. But the problem is that you can only invest so much money per year before you run out of it, right? And you got to pay taxes. So what are a couple of solutions to this limitation on mass? One, you can legally minimize your taxes. And two, you can invest for equity and recycle your capital. And we're going to get into that into detail because that's a lot of what Wealth 2.0 is all about. So let's start with the first one, though, minimizing taxes. My CPA is a guy by the name of Tom Wheelwright, which probably you recognize. He's written some books in the Rich Dad series. He's Robert Kiyosaki CPA as well. Smart guy. I love Tom. And Tom says that the tax law is really just a series of incentives provided by the government. Now, an example of that is oil and gas investment, drilling, right? So drilling, you can, if you invested $50,000 in a drilling project, you're probably going to be able to write that whole $50,000 off in the first year. The problem is oil and gas for me, I don't know about you, maybe you've had better luck, but it is incredibly speculative. And in my book, I try not to let the tax wag the tail. So it might be a good tax play, but if I'm never going to see that money again, well, I might as well just, buy something that I can expense, right? Rather than think of it as an investment. But then there's real estate, which we all love, of course. And there are some things here others may have been talking about, but I'm going to talk about in a little bit more, which is bonus depreciation as it relates to a cost segregation study. All right. Now the significance of this is that is huge. You probably know what a cost segregation analysis is, but I'm going to tell you briefly. Cost segregation analysis in a large commercial, in a residential property, you may get an engineering study that's going to separate out it's going to separate out real property from chattel, things that you can pull off the walls, cabinets and, if there's some flooring that can come off or various things you can pull off, that's all chattel. A cost segregation study usually will come out to 30% chattel, 70% real property. Real property is always going to be depreciated at 27 and a half years for this kind of real estate. And then you've got the chattel, which you used to be able to depreciate at just 5 years. So cost segregation analysis allowed you to accelerate some of your depreciation. That's great. But with the Trump law, bonus depreciation allowed us to take that 5 years of chattel depreciation and squeeze it all into the first year. So because we take a lot of debt in real estate, so, sometimes we'll have, say, 30% equity and 70% debt, what in effect happens is that when you invest, say, $100,000 in an opportunity, you may be able to write off $90,000, close to $100,000 in the first year against other income, passive income. So passive income could be from, say I have a lot of physicians listening to me. They own surgery centers, they own other types of things that are passive income, but they are not tax beneficial. These are the types of things you can do. Other income that you're getting passive income on. So say you've got a bunch of notes that are producing income that you pay ordinary taxes, you could use a bonus depreciation against that. So anyway, if here's an example. So if you invested $100,000 in an opportunity and say it yielded 8 to 10% cash on cash, if you were to write off 90% of that against your AGI, another passive income, you would effectively be, depending on your tax rate, save about $40,000. And so that cash in cash all of a sudden looks closer to like 14 to 17% situation. So that's just, that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but just to give you the sense of what kind of power that particular law has. The next thing I want to talk about is velocity in terms of how how you can, what you're actually trying to do here. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to replace your income. If you're trying to replace your income, then it's going to take you a very long time to do it if you're making a lot of money. So for example, if you're making $500,000 per year, and I know these numbers are a little high, but I have a lot of doctors and dentists in my group, so that's why I'm talking about it that way. If you want to try to replace that income, as we said before, it's going to take you a very long time. And at 10% cash on cash, you'd have to invest about $5 million. That's a lot of money to invest. So what's a more efficient way to do that? Well, you could accelerate the growth of your capital by simply recycling it, right? So again, we're talking about math. If you save your money using, the smart tax planning, using cost segregation analysis, you have more money to invest. And if you use the concept of velocity to figure how can I get my own money back in my pocket quickly, you'll need less money to invest because you're going to keep recycling it through different opportunities. So, we all look for certain types of returns, right? And, with real estate investors, will say, oh, I want 10% or I want 15% cash on cash. Those are good. But what's even better is infinite returns. And I'm going to talk about exactly what that is in a second, but this is possible. The concept of infinite returns is very possible in commercial real estate because of two major factors. One is the ability to borrow 70 to 80% of the money for an asset and from the bank, and then just bring 20 to 30% to the table. The other is the way that commercial real estate, and I'm not talking about, when I say commercial, I'm just talking about greater than 4 units here. I'm not talking about malls and stuff. I'm a multifamily guy. But the way commercial loans are issued, they're ultimately commercial real estate of any kind, whether it's residential, et cetera, is valued. It's valued not by what someone thinks, but rather by the net operating income generated by the property. So basically, it's simple. If you drive up the income of the property, then you're going to drive up the value of the property. So it makes it pretty simple if you think about it mathematically. Now, this idea of infinite returns, if you're a real estate person in general, is not going to be too foreign because you're familiar with the cash out refi, right? And it's the same kind of concept, right? If you had a house you were flipping or something like that, you pull out the invested equity after you've done the rehab and the bank gives you a loan, and all of a sudden you've got no equity in the deal, but you still own the house. That's infinite returns, right? Because you've pulled your risk off the table. You pulled your equity and you can invest that somewhere else. So if you have no equity in the deal, the returns are infinite. So most of the time though, unfortunately, this happens largely from dumb luck. You hold a property long enough and you create equity. We mentioned also that you could flip a house. It's another way to force equity. But the problem with flipping houses, in my view, I'm not a single family guy. You may be, but in my view, the problem with it is it's very subjective. The pricing on, single family homes and residential property of less than 4 units it's based on what somebody thinks they ought to pay for it, right? It's not based on net operating income, right? And you buy a house, it's what somebody thinks it's worth. And when you're buying commercial real estate, we value the property mathematically. So we can drive up the value of a property by improving the property with increased income and decreasing expenses. So, this concept of infinite returns, though, is not that uncommon. You see it with some good syndicators. My friend Ken McElroy does this at MC Companies. It's not uncommon for that refi to happen in 5 years with a good value add process and a good operator. So basically you put in $100,000, get it back in 5 years, and recycle the money into a new property while maintaining ownership and cash flow in the initial property. So the beauty of that is now when you do that, you're making money in 2 places at the same time with the same initial capital investment. So you need less mass if you can recycle your money over and over into new investments. It's all about speed. That's what I mean with infinite returns, is just trying to take the same money, recycling it over and over and over and over again. So this is not all theory. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my work with Western Wealth Capital. I'm a general partner with this multifamily syndicator. The CEO of Western Wealth Capital is a computer scientist, so she loves the idea of figuring out how we can go faster just by using math. Now, the way we do this in practice is by using something that is called a Freddie Mac supplemental loan through the Freddie Mac program, which allows us to technically, in our loan covenants, get up to 100% loan to value. And that doesn't mean we're doing 100% like no money down loan. That's not what we're doing. That's what the loan will allow us to take, up to 100% of the value. Now, we only take about 72, 73% of that loan. And then as soon as we get the loan, we have our value add program, and then we sprint from day one. We don't even wait for people to move out of their houses, right? We put in washer dryers, we change the cabinets, we do all of our renovations while they're at work, right? And that's and we call this the need for speed. But what happens in this case is because we have this loan for 100% initial loan to value, we don't have to spend money to refinance to pull equity off the table. We just need an appraisal. So that's the reason for the 100% loan to value. So in 12 to 18 months, our goal is to improve the property so much, to add so much net operating income that we go back to the bank and say, hey, we want an appraisal. And they do an appraisal, not a refi, because that's expensive. And then we get 50% of investor capital back in their pocket at 12 to 18 months. And then the rest of it within 4 years, a total of 4 years. And so on average, it's about 40 months where we get people a return at 100% on capital. At that point, again, now you've invested $100,000. Say it's 100,000, it could be 25,000, but 100,000 is easier math. You'd get $50,000 back to invest somewhere else in 12 to 18 months. And then you're at that point double dipping, right? You're not having to make more money in order to invest. Now you're recycling that money right away, and the rest of the money, as I said, the rest of 50% capital, initial capital that you have, you'll see that within 4 years. Again, recycle that. Once investors get their money out of the deal, they still have ownership and cash flow and keep recycling the same money in other deals over and over, collecting big bumps on disposition every 3 to 5 years. So sounds interesting, right? So it is reality. I'm going to show you a little bit of numbers just to illustrate how this works in practice. Western Wealth, this is a little old. Let's see here. See if I can go back. This is a little old. Again, we're probably... we're probably up to about 62 properties now. But, as you can see, over $1 billion of real estate purchased. Do a lot of real estate. I'm going to give you an example. This is just sort of a case study pulled off from past property. These properties that we do are typically no less than 250 units. We've been up to the mid 500s in terms of units. But this is a typical type of value add thing. So this renovation that you're seeing on the left, the target is usually these properties from the 80s that nobody's renovated since the 80s, right? So you see that, and then you see the bottom. That's called a Gold Star renovation, and that's what it looks like, not just in the kitchen, but the rest of the apartment. And that cost us about $6,000 to do. And in this particular example, we had 200 units that we did that. It cost $6,000 a piece to do. Each one of these we've found value ultimately because of the math involved in driving up rent and turning that into more net operating income. We found that each unit increased each time we did this renovation. It resulted in a $30,000 increase in the value of the property. So you do the math there: 200 units times $30,000 in value. That increased $6 million in the value of the property. Of course, that's going to come back to us upon disposition of the property. Similarly, as people know, in real estate, washer dryers is sort of like the gold for multifamily real estate. Well, yeah, pretty much just multifamily real estate, because we can make a lot of money off of adding washer dryers. In this case, 200 units. Each one added $50 per month to rent, and that drove up the net operating income and drove $2 million of equity into the property. So again, it's forcing equity, and this is what we do. We try to do it very, very quickly. Just some examples on the refinance. I'm going to say refinances, but they're really the appraisals, because we don't have to refinance because of that supplemental debt. But here's an example. You see Edgewater at the top here. What that's telling you is 71%. So again, for math, let's use a $100,000 investment. Typically, our investments are about $25,000, and it's all for accredited investors, by the way. So, but say the top one here with Edgewater, if you invested $100,000 at 16 months, the first appraisal was done, and we pulled back. We got investors back $71,000 out of $100,000 off that first 16 months. Not bad, right? Because then you can turn around and take that $71,000 and put it in something else. Similarly, you see the other ones, 55 and 56%, 15 and 18 months. So, this is not all theoretical. This is what we're doing in real time. You can see down when you look at Villa Serena and Lantana Gardens, they've gone through that appraisal twice. And in both cases, 100% return of equity, and that's at 40 months for one of them and 33 months for the other. Again, that doesn't mean you've lost ownership in the property. Now you do have ownership in the property until sale, and that's where the divestments to date are really telling, because it's not just about getting your money back in your pocket, as you know. It is about how much money you make. And because of the speed, largely because of the speed at which we're working, you can see the annualized return on equity. The average annualized return is averaging about 30% annualized return. So in other words, if you took all the divestments to date, our investors are getting about 30% cash on cash through the hold period. Not cash on cash, but basically they're doubling their money every 3 years. And that's through 30 divestments. I want to talk, I'm not here just to, plug Western Wealth and what we do. If you want to learn more about it, go to wealthformula.com, and you can also, join Investor Club if you're an accredited investor there. But really, I want to continue with the educational component of this, because the next part of this is leverage, and the next and final part of that equation for Wealth 2.0. And leverage is obvious to real estate investors most of the time, right? Obvious because you use it for leverage appreciation to increase yields, and now, as you saw, for infinite returns. You can't do that without leverage. But leverage is not just money in the bank. That's not the only thing. It's anything that levers the resources that you have. It could be people, right? What if you could lever up your tax deductions? There's something else for you. Because we talked about, whatever you can save from legally from not paying taxes, you can invest more. So why not focus on that as well? So what if you could leverage, say, for example, your charitable giving, and if you could take your $100,000 investment, or your charitable giveaway of $100,000, and you could leverage that for a $500,000 deduction. Well, it's actually kind of possible through something called conservation easements. Again, these are pretty unique and different types of situations that are really open to accredited investors only. But let me give you an idea of what this is. Conservation easements are basically when a builder has land developed, he may have an opportunity to forego a building, elect to give up those rights altogether in perpetuity to preserve the land for conservation purposes. And that foregoing of the building rights may trigger the ability to take a tax deduction on the land. But the amount of that deduction is made by a valuation. It's not just what you paid for the land or what it's worth. And it includes, in part, the value of the property that would have been built, right? So now you're talking about taking a deduction for more, potentially more than you actually put in. Now, this is a very complex process. It has to be done right. There's only a handful of people who know how to do this. There's a ton of people who use this with last names Trump and Turner. And these kinds of things often yield valuations that can be extremely beneficial to taxpayers with all income types, including W-2 income, and can allow you to write off up to about 50% of your AGI. So because, not everybody has a $20 million piece of land to give away, there are syndicated conservation easements, just like there is syndicated real estate to invest in, and can be in units as small as 20 to 30,000. Typically, they're only available to private placements and accredited investors. And here's an example of how you can use leverage there. Say you had you were in the 40% tax rate, and your AGI was $400,000. So if you're paying 40% flat, for simplification, you pay $160,000 tax. But a lot of these conservation easements have a valuation of, say, 5. That's actually pretty reasonable for a conservation easement. And so if you have a 5, what that means is now you multiply 5 times your investment. So your AGI goes down to $200,000, and the next thing you know, now you're paying taxes on your $200,000, plus you add in the investment of $40,000. So instead of paying $160,000 in taxes, you're paying $120,000. In fact, it can be a lot more powerful than that, but I just wanted to give you an example. Remember, with conservation easements in particular, I'm just giving you this example for leverage, but the IRS hates these things. They are legal. You have to find a legitimate operator. You have to dot every I, cross every T. Do not be impressed by overly inflated valuations. Anyway, if you want to know more about it, you can join Investor Club at wealthformula.com if you're an accredited investor. In conclusion, Wealth 2.0 is a significant upgrade over the 4 houses to a hotel model. And it's really, it's all about math and knowing the right people and operators to execute it. Again, it's wealthformula.com. You can check out the podcast at Wealth Formula Podcast. This is the kind of stuff we talk about. I have a Wealth 1.0 book for more beginners. You can text 44222 and type Wealth Formula, one word, to get that if you're interested. Otherwise, again, go ahead and check out wealthformula.com. And I think that's all I have for you. See. So I don't know. I think I'm waiting for Danny. I'm not entirely sure what we do now. If we're doing a Q&A or what. You bet, David. Any other questions or answers while I'm waiting? Because I don't know what if Danny's coming back on. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. All right, folks. Well, I'll leave it at that then, and I'll just sign off. Thank you all for joining us.
Good evening, Multifamily Investor Nation. For those of you still in room 3, we have wrapped on the wealth formula to optimize returns with Buck. Let me pause it and see. Okay,